Today we have joining us Jessica Levith, talking about dispelling the myth of sex and love addiction.
Before I go into this part of the lecture, I want to give you a little story of my own process. So, withdrawal for me, as with many people that I've talked about, it has brought me to my knees. I've been on the ground in a ball. You know, when you feel like someone is not going to call you, and it's, rationally speaking, it doesn't make sense, right? But what I want to say is, what do I want to say? I want to talk about how, when I was going through, when I came into recovery, I started tracking my body, and I started tracking my mind, right? And I found the same thing over and over again happening. There were two things happening. The first thing was I would have a physiological reaction. Let's say someone didn't call me. My body would tighten up, and I would sweat, and I would end up on the ground crying. If it was bad enough, I'd throw up. I'd make myself throw up, anything to release the tension, right? And at the same time, right after the physiological thing was happening, in my brain, I was thinking, I'm going to die. This person has to call me. If they don't call me, I'm going to die. I don't know what I'm going to do. And then the rational thinking comes in, but it wasn't nice rational thinking. It was thinking, why are you so messed up? Why can't you fix this? And so, as I was doing research for this lecture, actually, I was finding material that was so validating to me as a sex and love addict and as a clinician. And it was when I started running across the new modern attachment theory. So modern attachment theory the spearhead for that is Alan Shore, Dr. Alan Shore, and Judith Shore, and Bessel van der Kolk. And what they're basically saying is that in your first year of life, your central nervous system is only partially developed. And it is the job of the primary caretaker to help develop that nervous system. And if that doesn't happen, the caretaker has to do two things. They have to positively arouse the child, and they also have to be able to calm that child. And if that doesn't happen, what happens is your central nervous system basically starts getting out of whack. And as you're developing as a child, it starts looking like a child who becomes isolated because no one wants to play with them. And then through adolescence, it becomes that child thinking, what is wrong with me? And starting to seek outside people to fix them. This is part of the template that's being set down for sex and love addiction, right? So when we look at the brain, I look at the brain in terms of sex and love addiction from the trauma theory perspective. This is the trauma theory perspective, that our brain is actually three separate brains, one on top of the other, right? So the bottom brain is the reptilian brain. This controls our unconscious functioning, our breathing, our heart rate, our hiccuping. The limbic system, or the middle brain, controls, it's like the epicenter of emotionality. And it consolidates our memory, and that's really important to remember. It processes, consolidates, and stores our long-term emotional memory. And then the top brain is our human brain. It's where we make our decisions and our processing and our problem solving. So going back to me on the floor, in withdrawal, what I realized on that floor was that I was in survival mode, right? I was here. I was in the brainstem. My body was thinking I was going to die. And how did that happen, right? Like, how did I go from not getting the phone call to thinking I'm going to die? And so what I started realizing when I'm reading the modern attachment theory, I started reading about two pieces in the limbic system. This is the triune brain that I was just talking about, the three-part brain. So in the limbic system, you've got the amygdala and you've got the hippocampus, and these are two important pieces when it comes to memory, emotional memory. So the amygdala is the part of our brain, this little almond-shaped piece. There's actually one on each side, and it senses, it's the night watchman. It looks out for danger 24/7, right? And it's always on, and it's fully formed at birth. When it does sense danger, it does two things. It shoots a message down to the central nervous system, get into gear, you have to save yourself. And it also shoots a message through what's called the hippocampus, which is right underneath it, and that goes up to the cortex. That's our rational thinking, right? what happens during trauma, if a child suffers from abuse long enough or a serious enough abuse, damage is done to the hippocampus. That is the tube that sends the message to the front brain. If it's repeated over and over, this hippocampus is going to keep going. It goes offline during trauma, so it's going to keep going offline. And eventually, that hippocampus will atrophy. And what's going to happen is, when you hear danger, you're only going to go to the central nervous system. You're not going to the rational brain. And that's the trenches that are going to get dug. And so, what the other thing that hippocampus does that's very important is it consolidates memory. This is where the memory is getting consolidated. So if there's damage done to the hippocampus, you're going to end up with a fragmented memory. Your memory is not going to process in a linear way. You're going to get a smell here or a taste there. And this is what happens during PTSD. People get flashbacks. So if you have a fragmented memory as a child, in addition to this central nervous system that's thrown out of whack, and you're feeling broken, you're actually going to have a fragmented sense of self, right? Because you're developing yourself, but you don't know who you are because everything's fragmented. It's not just explicit memory that's being consolidated. It's all of your senses, you know? It is who you're developing, who you are as a person. And now you've got these two things happening, the central nervous thing happening where it's out of whack, and the sense of self where it's out of whack. And this is going to be the setup that I talk about when I talk about the template for sex and love addiction.